Here in the U.S., more are moving to urban city centers every year. In the late 1960s, about 73% of Americans were living in urban areas. As of 2015, it was nearly 82%. For more on this, I spoke to Joel Berg. He leads Hunger Free America.
More Americans are moving toward suburbs that surround urban areas, and that's actually been the biggest growth in population in America, as well as the biggest growth in poverty and hunger. Suburban areas surrounding cities used to be bastions of the upper middle class, and now because so many other people have moved to cities, people can't afford to live in cities anymore. But the bottom line is because there are so few jobs in rural areas, and because wages are so low, and because so much of agriculture and mining and forestry work has been mechanized, that there's really nothing for people to do these days in much of rural America for work, and that's why they have to move.
Let's talk about healthcare specifically. We know there are fewer nurses in rural areas of our country, and health in general is really inadequate for the poor. How do we combat this?
Well, health problems and hunger problems are intertwined. When people can't afford health care, they have less money to spend on food. And that's one of the reasons 41 million Americans, including 12 million American children, are hungry. But in rural America, people desperately need help of an adequate safety net like vast majority of other civilized Western nations have. And because America not only doesn't have that, but we're unraveling the small amount of health care we do have, the problem's only going to get worse. Ironically, the very people who gave the most votes to our current leaders are the very people being shafted most by this rollback in healthcare. If there was enough funding for healthcare, there would be enough nurses. In the end, this is about money, and our leaders have decided to give tax cuts to the mega rich instead of ensuring that all Americans have health coverage. It's crazy.
How does technology factor into all of this? Americans in urban areas obviously have more access to high-speed internet, and they tend to have more new technology like the smartphones. How does this affect hunger?
Well, most Americans in rural areas do have smartphones, but very few relatively have broadband internet. So there is no question that there is a technology gap in rural America. 100, or 90 years ago in America, a lot of rural areas didn't have running water or electricity, and it was the federal government that took the lead in ensuring that's happening. Now with deregulation, we're allowing big companies to essentially leave out large swaths of America, and the only way to counter that is to make sure that the government acting on behalf of all Americans ensures that we bring broadband technology everywhere. That is absolutely critical in growth. Now that fewer people are working in agriculture or mining or forestry, the real growth is in the information economy, and rural America desperately needs that.
Joel, when we think about soup kitchens or government access programs to feed the hungry, most people think the homeless, but that's not necessarily true.
No, the vast majority of people in America who are hungry are not homeless. Here in New York City, there are a few thousand people living on the streets, about 60,000 people living in homeless shelters, but about 1.2 million people in New York City alone, the richest city in the history of the world, at least today. Maybe Shanghai surpassed it, but 1.2 million people in New York can't afford enough food. So it's not about homeless people. Many people in China or the rest of the world probably falsely believe that it's about non-white people or minorities, when the largest number of people in America who are poor and hungry are white, and most are working. And so it really is about major failings in our economy and major failings in our social safety net, why we have such a poverty problem and hunger problem here in the United States.
Alrighty, well, Joel Berg, we're going to have to leave it right there, CEO of Hunger Free America.